The origin of life is one of the most important but complicated things to have ever occurred. Here are 4 of my favorite books on the subject and a summary of those books so that you can understand how it all began. Let's dive in. Hey guys, welcome to the channel. My name is Reese. I used to teach tech ethics at MIT, but now I'm teaching the series on how everything evolved, which synthesizes a decade of my research and these 20,000 note cards I've made on these subjects. So a lot of these note cards come from these books that I've read and that I love. And let's dive into 4 of those books today. Okay, so these books are The Origins of Life, The Vital Question, The Origin and Nature of Life on Earth, and then this final book on assembly theory. So let's start with this first one, The Origins of Life. And this is a book from 1999, so it's kind of a late 90s book, one of the earlier books on the origin of life, by John Maynard Smith and Eörs Szathmáry? I don't know. John Maynard Smith is a famous kind of mathematician and quantitative biologist. And the key idea behind this book is what's called an evolutionary transition in individuality. The idea of that is that over time, you have these like little individuals that start operating with each other and eventually they groupify and then turn into a group. And then those groups start to operate and then those groupify and then you go higher and higher up the scales. And so, you can imagine a group of humans operating as a group in a town together, and then a town turns into a county, and a county turns into a state, and a state turns into a nation. And so this also happens biologically, where we have, and the way that this book is structured is it jumps between each of these evolutionary transitions in individuality, where it says, oh, we had all these RNAs kind of interacting with each other, and then there's a survival of the fittest RNA, but then they also start to be with each other into these chromosomes. And so you start to get these longer chains of RNA, these chromosomes, and then they start to base pair with each other into DNA. And then you have these single-celled things that once you get endosymbiosis, those things start to get bigger, and then those bigger cells start to interact with each other. So the cells start to act in these multicellular ways. And then those multicellular creatures like us, we have 40 trillion cells. Someone like us, we start to interact in bigger groups like social insects do. And you have these insect colonies, or you have these human tribes. And so that's the idea behind this book. And the key thing is this idea of evolutionary transitions and individuality, ETIs. This idea has been pretty important. And so this is a recent paper from 2013. So this is referencing idea from 30 years ago. You can imagine us plus AI combining into a shared group. And that group might start to replicate over time. So they have this really kind of bad image at the bottom of this piece, which shows, you can imagine it's us plus our little AI at generation 1. And then in generation 2, it's us plus the AI again. And so we start to get replicated over time with our AIs, not just as individuals. So that's that book. Really interesting book about information and about how groups start to form over time through life. The second book is by Nick Lane, and it's called The Vital Question. And Bill Gates loves this book, an amazing inquiry into the origins of life. And it's on energy, evolution, and the origins of complex life. And so this Nick Lane book there are kind of 2 big pieces to this book, where, one piece is about the origin of life, but then another big piece is about endosymbiosis later. So let's talk about the origin of life one first. Well, another note, by the way, you can see Andrej Karpathy talk about this book. The famous OpenAI and Tesla researcher says, easily one of my favorite books ever. Nick Lane is an excellent scientist author, mixing engaging presentation, highly intriguing ideas, and tons of technical details. I learned a lot about the origins of life and unlocked a whole new level of appreciation for the fantastic cosmic story every one of us is part of, with all the happy accidents along the way. So if Andre loves it, we love it too. So for the origin of life, Nick talks about these really cool, Nick is a hydrothermal vents guy. And so he thinks, about at the bottom of these ocean vents, which look like, this, that they have this beautiful thing where they have these iron sulfur clusters. This thing called ferredoxin, which exists in our cells today. It exists as this little like an iron wire, and that same iron sulfur cluster exists in these hydrothermal vents. So it's a very cool idea, and he shows how in these vents, another good image from it is this one on the left, where you can see, image B here, where you see these iron sulfur clusters, FeS, and down here you can see an alkaline environment, aka there's tons of electrons there, versus a acidic environment of ocean water at the top. and you have this inorganic barrier in between them. And because of those things, you start to get the electrons from the bottom want to go up to the top and want to meet with the protons up there. And as they do that, they move across this little iron sulfur cluster and then start to create these carbon chains up there. And so that's kind of gives the energy to create these carbon chains. So that's the idea behind the book. It's very cool. But the interesting part about this book is what Nick Lane actually means by the vital question. He's not talking about the origin of life. He's not saying, why did we get the origin of life? For Nick, the vital question is actually, why did we have 4 billion years of evolution? But for all of that, you have these single-celled creatures, these bacteria. Why have they not changed almost at all? They changed for the first, maybe 10, 100 million years, but they mostly haven't changed at all. But then halfway through 2 billion years ago, something happened that then enabled all this big life and all this change that we see today. So what the heck happened there? And what happened is endosymbiosis. When we had bacteria and archaea, all these little single-celled creatures, and one of the archaea ate a bacteria. Instead of just eating it, they started to be roommates together, which was really crazy. They were trying to share their DNA. It was this very crazy thing. And eventually what happened is the bacteria lost all of its genes. It went from 4,000 genes just to 40 genes and turned into the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. That mitochondria, by doing that then drastically increased the amount of energy available to these little creatures, where instead of having a huge genome that you then have to upkeep in order to making energy, you can instead have this really small genome, a 40 gene genome, 99% smaller of the size, 1/100th. And that tiny little genome, it doesn't cost much to keep it going, but it produces so much energy. And the other crucial thing is that before, in order to get more energy, the membrane of these little creatures is where they had a charged membrane, and that's where they were able to produce ATP. So if you want to get more energy, you had to increase the surface area, but by increasing the surface area, you increase the volume. And the volume, surface area increases at a squared rate, but volume increases at a cubed rate. And so you couldn't get that much bigger, because if you got too big, you had this huge thing. And in order to keep that huge thing going, to get the energy, it was too much. And instead what you can do is you can have all these little energy droplets, these little energy factories, mitochondria inside them that can be small, just 40 genes, and then the whole thing can get bigger, and the membrane is no longer coupled to energy production. So you can get 1,000x more energy per gene, and you can get 1,000x bigger. And that's what we saw happen, is that bacteria are these small little things now, and then these bigger things, eukaryotic cells, are like 1,000x bigger. And then those things then could start to experiment with proteins more, and also starting to be multicellular creatures at that time. And so Nick has a bunch of things that back this up. One of them is on the right here, where you can see this is a metabolic rate per gene. And the A is before, it's a log scale. But you can just see here that, yes, there was an amount of energy per gene used to be tiny, and now it's a lot bigger. Okay, now let's talk about the third book, The Origin and Nature of Life on Earth, The Emergence of the Fourth Geosphere by Eric Smith and Harold Morowitz. This book is crazy. This book was written a little bit, the first book was 1999. Nick Lane's book was 2014, 2015, and this book's like 2015, 2016. It's like 700 pages. It's probably the most difficult book I've read, but also one of the most satisfying. This guy, Eric Smith, is one of the key authors in it, and he wrote with Harold Morowitz right before Harold died. And this thing is a talk by Eric Smith, and one of the commenters, I love what he says here. He's a polymath's polymath, which is so true. He's like, your favorite polymath's favorite polymath, your favorite band's favorite band. It's ridiculously good at cross-disciplinary physics. He's a physics guy, but can do geology, geochemistry, biochemistry, etc., all the above. And the book, has this line, the emergence of the fourth geosphere. So what does that mean? Well, we know that there are these three traditional geospheres. There's the atmosphere, the air, the hydrosphere, the water, and the lithosphere, the land. So those are the traditional four geospheres. And then we have this new fourth geosphere, which is the biosphere. And the idea there is that you have these patterns that kind of naturally evolve a survival of the stable with atmospheres and hydrospheres and lithospheres. Something like the lithosphere, you get these patterns of crystals where you get these, sand and quartz and basalt rock, like in Hawaii or whatever. And there's a bunch of different ways that matter can form when it's in one of these three states, solid, liquid, or gas. And then with the biosphere, we enter this new fourth state of matter, kind of folded matter or chained matter, where you start to have these carbon chains that start to have a new kind of natural way that they can be in the world. And that natural way that they can be is mostly driven by the Krebs cycle and metabolism, and then eventually starts to get bigger. You get longer and longer carbon chains, and they start to make the folded matter of RNA and proteins. And so what Eric shows in this graph is this is the Krebs cycle. It is, from 2 to 6 carbons, and that today we turn the Krebs cycle one way, where we take, sugars and we burn them with oxygen, and we use that to create energy and also to create all of these different chains, 2 through 6 carbon chains that then start to create amino acids and sugars and everything else. Today we run it one way where we turn biomass into energy, but back in the day, we turned energy and turned it into biomass. And so you can see that this Krebs cycle, all these little 2 through 6 carbon chains, those then are the building blocks for the rest of life. You can take one of them and then turn it into all the amino acids. You can take one of them, turn it into all the sugars. You can take one of them, turn it into all the lipids. So fundamentally, Eric is talking about these reaction networks. This is another way to view the Krebs cycle, and it's a frozen process that geology and physics naturally found, and that now in life today, we have all these things, what are called cofactors or the B vitamins, which double down on this process and make it the case that in any of our bodies, we have 1,000 mitochondria per cell. It's running 1,000 copies of this. We have 1 million copies of this process running in every single cell of ours. And that's 10 trillion cells that are running a million times of this process. And that process is running in everything, in my cat, in the trees, everywhere. Every cell is running 1 million copies of this network graph right here. Which is crazy. And so this is what he means by the fourth geosphere. It's this kind of simple carbon chained, it's chained matter or folded matter at the base of this new carbon chain based network graph that emerges. But this book it's just full. It's 700 pages. It's full of amazing stuff. The other really cool thing about it is this graph on the left. What it shows is that we're used to a 3-letter amino acid, where AAA turns into this amino acid, and AAC turns into aspartate, and AAG turns into glycine or whatever. And what this graph shows is actually you can kind of collapse that from 3 bits, or rather 3 letters, each of which have 4 options. So it's 64 possibilities. You can reduce that to 16 possibilities, and this gets you almost all the way there. And so likely at the start of life, ribosomes just worked with a two base pair system to create all of these things before doing the other system, which has just like a little bit of more specificity to it. And so this is an amazing 4x4 graph that shows that. And he also shows here, this image is amazing. What this is showing is that, for something like C, if the first thing is a C, you're almost certainly working with this long carbon chain, this 5 carbon chain alpha ketoglutarate, and that you're just doing some small bits of adding the nitrogen there, doing a little bit of nitrogenation at these different points, and then similar with A, you have a 4 carbon chain and you do a little bit of nitrogenation at these other points. And then U is pyruvate, 3 carbon chain, and you're just doing nitrogenation at these other points. And so this graph starts to show this code within the codons, where we had these natural ways of physics and chemistry and thermodynamically, there are these natural ways that RNA turns into proteins. So yeah, it's a beast of a book, but if you just want to get started with Eric Smith, try out this 1-hour lecture from him from 10 years ago on these new theories on the origin of life with Dr. Eric Smith. I'll put it in the comments below. It's amazing. It's an hour, and it's one of the best hours I've ever spent on the internet. So check that out. Now, the 4th book is Life as No One Knows It, A Physics of Life's Emergence by Sara Walker. Sara Walker is a beast. She's the youngest of all these people. She's like, all the other people are like 60. She's like 40. She's not even 40 years old yet. So she's super smart. In this book, I haven't read it. It's from 2024, so it's like the most recent of all these Origin of Life books. This is a book on assembly theory. And so it's I haven't read it, but, assembly theory is great. And what assembly theory shows, as a reminder, when you think about all the objects in the universe, it's kind of a chemist's lens on the universe. And you can ask, how many origami folds does it take to make something? Or in chemist terms, to make a molecule, how many different bonds do you need to make the thing? With something like the Krebs cycle being simple and something more complicated like, amino acids or RNA or all these things. And so you can start to quantifiably ask the question, what is the assembly index of something? AKA, how many bonds does it take to create it? And then also, what's the copy index of that thing? How many copies of it are there in the universe? And what we learn from this is that in assembly theory, you only get complicated, that non-life only produces small assembly index things, while life produces high assembly index things, also with a high copy number. And so you can see that here. I love this as she says the answer to life is not 42, like the Hitchhiker's Guide, but rather it's 15. Where above 15, if you want to get an assembly index higher above 15, only life creates things with that high of an assembly index. So that's the idea behind this graph. And then you can also see that here, where you can see this is a things that's showing, non-biological things are below 15. Something like quartz, it's not that complicated, SiO4, but then when you get to more complicated things, they have higher and higher assembly indexes. So those are 4 books that I loved that helped me understand the origin of life. I hope help you understand it as well. And if you want to learn more about the origin of life or different books that you want me to cover, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you as always for watching, and thank you to Roots donors for supporting this channel. If you want to understand more about the past and how we got here, check out the previous videos here. And if you want to understand the future and where we're going, feel free to subscribe here. Hope to see you then. Bye.